Gluconeogenesis. What is it? Is it important? And is it a grim reaper when it comes to the ketogenic or carnivore diet, as a lot of people seem to think? Let's dive into those answers. But first things first, my name is Jordan, and on my channel, I discuss all things keto, carnivore, low carb, provide tips and tricks to help you get your health back on track, as well as sprinkle in some grocery hauls and full days of eating. So if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing below. Now let's get into the content. All right, so gluconeogenesis, a hot topic in the keto, carnivore, and low carb communities. A lot of people tend to think that you eat too much protein, it turns into sugar in the blood and knocks you out of ketosis, so on and so forth. Is there some truth to that? Sure. It's contextual. It's important to know that gluconeogenesis is a normal physiological process. Even when eating glucose through your diet, you are still going to be your body's still going to be performing gluconeogenesis. Again, it's a natural physiological, biological function for humans to make sure we have the required glucose necessary for survival, regardless of dietary intake. But when on a keto or carnivore diet, or even a low carb diet, it's important to understand that gluconeogenesis equals survival. Without dietary glucose, there are still cells and parts of the brain that require glucose for fuel. The kidneys, the testes in men require glucose for fuel, and red blood cells particularly also. So it is important to understand that you need glucose for survival. Less is not always more or better in this instance. You do need a basal level of blood glucose just to not go hypoglycemic, pass out, faint, die, whatever the worst case scenario, whatever the case might be. So you always need, if you're fasted, between 60 and 90 or so milligrams of glucose per deciliter. They'll range depending if it's postprandial, right after a meal. If it's fasted early in the morning, then that'll range. But you're not eating glucose, so where's that glucose coming from? It's coming from gluconeogenesis, which again is why it's important. If 20 to 30% of the brain requires glucose, you need to make sure the brain is getting that required amount of glucose. So again, it's crucial for survival. Even more important role when talking about keto, carnivore, and low carb diets. And it's important to know that it's demand driven. And again, this demand comes from certain things like kidney function, red blood cells, brain derived energy needs, the testes in men, and then the fact that you need to obviously have a certain minimal amount in your blood at all times to not go hypoglycemic. And you also need one of the body's primary uses for glucose is to make sure muscle glycogen is always topped off in the event of the fight or flight response, when the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system is activated in times of either starvation or threats, things like that. Muscle glycogen needs to be topped off for that. So again, demand driven. If you're exercising a lot, if you're running a lot, whatever type of exercise you're doing, high intensity activity, you might see a rise in blood glucose levels because gluconeogenesis might ramp up slightly just to prepare, especially if you're consistent in the gym day after day after day. The body is adapting to that stimulus and that stress, and it's realizing that on a daily basis it is having to meet and exceed its glucose demand levels. So again, normal, natural process, reacting to the demands you're putting on your body, but important to know that it's going to happen no matter what. While on the topic of high intensity activity or exercise like weightlifting or very glycolytic cardiovascular type exercise like sprinting, a lot of gluconeogenesis occurs in other ways rather than just breaking down aminos from excess dietary protein. So one of those ways is from lactate or lactic acid buildup, which is part of movement. And especially part of movement when combined with exercise, you build up a lot of lactic acid, a lot of lactate, and that can be used for gluconeogenesis to provide the body the glucose it needs. So that lactic acid gets recycled and again used for gluconeogenesis, and maybe upwards of 10 to 15% of the gluconeogenesis that occurs is actually from excess dietary protein anyway. So another way that gluconeogenesis happens, and this is a big one in the low carb healthy fat or low carb high fat keto carnivore community, is from the glycerol molecule of a triglyceride. So triglycerides, fat energy in the blood, carried around on lipoproteins, aka cholesterol. That fat energy in the blood, as that glycerol molecule is attached to fatty acids, as those fatty acids are burned for energy, that glycerol molecule still floats around freely, and that is recycled and used for gluconeogenesis. So just understand that the fats you're eating are used for gluconeogenesis as well, and maybe even more so than the excess dietary protein. So don't be afraid of protein. Again, I'll put a link down below and at the end of this video, so stay till the end if you want to see the last video I just did on dietary protein in this experiment I'm doing. When it comes to dietary protein, making it about 50% of my calories, probably only for 30 days short term, and then I'll get back to probably sub 40% of my calories, around 35 to 40% of my calories coming from protein. But again, I'm not afraid of gluconeogenesis. I know it needs to happen. I mean, that's kind of the gist of gluconeogenesis. Short video, why I don't want you to be afraid of it, and kind of clearing the air for a lot of people. I've been eating this way for 3 years now. It was a concern of mine at the beginning, and I realized as I got more into this and did more and more research that gluconeogenesis is something that physiologically happens no matter what, may happen more frequently or more consistently in higher amounts in people who are not eating dietary carbohydrate, like myself and like many of you. But it's important to know that the process happens regardless, and I found out that it could happen from the glycerol molecule of a triglyceride, which kind of put my mind at ease. Once I heard that and realized that and lactic acid, which 3 to 4 days a week, I'm high intensity exercise and or weightlifting, so I have frequent times of lactic acid buildup, and again, just walking will create some small amounts of lactic acid. So you really do have enough supply, especially if you're not super lean and have body fat to break down, are eating dietary fat, or are exercising. You really have a plethora of ways, those three plus dietary protein, to provide the body with the structures it needs to perform gluconeogenesis. So it kind of shies me away from being afraid of protein. How much protein should you be eating if you're not eating any carbs? Probably more than you are. But again, it's important to know that glucose doesn't have to come from amino acids or the protein source in the diet. So this is a short, quick video about that. I really want to emphasize the fact that you all should not be afraid of protein. I hope that helps you all. I hope that helps clear some of the air. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. Oh, last thing, I will put my physique from this morning. So we're a week into this protein experiment. I will compare them, old physique, new physique. I don't know that there's much change. Again, I only exercise 3 to 4 days a week, but I think I've seen a little more tightness, a little more leanness, some vascularity in the lower abdomen starting to come back, and things like that. So could be water weight, I don't really know. Could just be a regular daily fluctuation, but same time of day, taking these videos, and this is kind of how they compare after 1 week of a lower fat, higher protein, 2 to 1, 2 grams of protein for every 1 gram of fat, energy to protein ratio experiment, and that's how it's going. So again, thank you for listening to the short rant about gluconeogenesis. Those are the results for the 1 week so far. We have 3 weeks left to go. Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate it. Keep up the good work. Let's get healthy together, and I will see you all in the next video.